Good evening. For the sake of our activity to start with tonight, Connie and Tony, if you wouldn't mind, can you move up here and sit like where Pat and Marilyn usually sit? You're going to sit in a row with Boo here, all right? I think everybody else would probably be good. Hey, man. Now, for the sake of this, I think I have 5 groups is how this will work. Ben and Melvina and Maria and Mom, you're going to be in a group. Dad, you don't have to move, but you and Josh and Jimmy and Jill. Tom, Debbie's excited too. She gets to give a speech later on tonight. You know, she was super excited. Tom was going to do it, and she said, "No, let me do it. I'm wanting to get no, I'm just kidding." But Tom, Debbie, and Mary and Will, you guys will be in a little group here. Kelly, your row will be, and then Boo and Connie and Tony and Linda and Lucille. All right? Now, before we do anything tonight, this is not a scriptural, biblical activity, but we're going to be talking about another miracle. But I have a little activity that you probably played a long time ago. How many of you remember at some point when you were younger playing the telephone game? Okay? When what you would do was, some of y'all have been around before telephones were even around, so that may be why some of y'all may be unfamiliar. We start this in a minute. Some of y'all can go out and light a fire and send smoke signals as your telephone game. But what you would do is you would whisper a sentence into the ear of somebody, and as it worked its way down the line, we'd see if we could keep it going. Okay? So that was how this would work. We're going to do something similar tonight, but I want you to think before we start, how will you be successful at this? What will it take for you to be successful at this? Now, I don't want an answer, but I want you to think, how will I be successful? Okay? Now, I'm going to save Lucille's group to last, and I feel like I want the laughs to come. Okay? But we're going to start here, and all of you can play, but I have a sentence here, and we're going to see what we can do with this. All right? So I'm going to give it to Ben. Now, Ben, we don't have to whisper it. We can just say it out loud, okay? But I'm going to say to you, and then you're going to pass it on. 2 tiny toads ate fat flying flies. Flies? All right. We did pretty good. Not great. All right. All right. So this is Dad to Josh to Jimmy or to Jill, whichever way you want to go, Josh. All right. I'm only saying it once. All right. 12 tumbling purple people pulled turnips. What you got, Jill? I do like how Dad turned around so magnificently and then just got it wrong right there. It's like, you'll need to listen to this. All right. So it's been we're struggling. All right. Tom, I'm going to start with you. Tom will go to Debbie, then to Will, then to Mary. All right. A bunch of yellow bananas launched on a blue boat. All right. So hopefully Now, I asked a minute ago, I said, what would you have to do to be successful? And I hope that as we have worked our way down the line here, some of the strategies are starting to sort of reveal themselves as ways to be successful. Okay? All right. Now, Kelly, I'm going to start with you, and it's just going to work its way down. Now, Shorty, can you hear? All right, good. I don't know what's going to happen by the time we get to Ella, but we'll hope for the best here. Kelly, we'll start with you. Many maids mop motels. You tell Annette. Say it to Annette. All right, there we go. It bothers me that the group that can hear the words did so much better than your all's group. Now, in honor of Lucille's doing something for the first time this week, we're going to go from Boo. We'll circle to Linda, and then Lucille, you're going to finish this, all right? Dogs dig holes for big bones. Pretty good. Pretty good. All right. Everybody, give all of y'all a hand right here. All right. So I purposely did a couple of things here. One, what did you notice about the sentence that I gave each group? Theirs were harder. I did that on purpose. I didn't know who would be able to hear as well over here for one thing. But also, what did you notice about sort of the makeup of the sentence? A bit of a tongue twister, yeah. Alliteration, the similar letters that it starts with. Did the sentences necessarily make sense? They weren't sentences that you would have said, "This is my car." They were not as common. But I asked you at the beginning, I said, what would you need to be successful? Now I'm going to ask you afterwards, what helped you be successful in this? Listening, okay? Paying attention. Patience. A good memory. Do what? Now, I think we saw some of those things get better as we went along. Because the first one wasn't great. Second one was even worse, but it got a lot better. And I think here's why. Normally when you're playing that game, you're whispering it so not everybody can hear it. But we picked up on the trick pretty good. Why don't we start listening when Daniel says it to the first person? That way, by the time it gets to Ella, it's already 4 different people. She's hearing it for the 4th time, not the first time. Now, how difficult would this game be if you couldn't hear? It would be impossible, right? What if you couldn't speak? It would be impossible. Okay? And so if you don't have those capabilities, then you're already behind the eight. We have those capabilities, but sometimes we have to pay a little closer attention to it as well. Well, tonight we're going to talk about a miracle that Jesus did, and that was healing a deaf and mute man. Okay? So a man who could not hear and a man who could not speak. And so I wanted us to play with this because I get, this is not something that you all do very often, but you do have to tell something that somebody told you, right? And if we're not careful, what will happen? We can get it wrong. On purpose? By default? Not at all. But sometimes that, when it gets through the 3rd or 4th person, it's made its way through. It can change quite a bit. So I want us to think about how if you did not have the ability to hear or the ability to speak, how an appearance of somebody like Jesus would make a huge difference in your life. Because if you didn't have that ability, you would have been out of the loop in what we're talking about here this evening. And so that's what we're going to talk about tonight. This miracle is found in two spots. Matthew chapter 15, verses 29, 30, and 31. But for our sake tonight, Mark 7, 31 to 37 is where we are going to focus most of our attention. Got all choked up here. All right. So we're talking tonight about Jesus healing the deaf and mute man. So we're going to be looking at this. Part of the reason we played this too is this is a very short lesson as well. So any other games you might come up with, we'll be welcome to play those as well here along the way. Lucille can tell us about her trip to the doctor again if we need to. Just if we got to buy a little time to get to the finish line. Yes. We are mostly Mark chapter 7. Uh-huh. 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 And, and that's not at all the lesson tonight, but that's exactly a point that I hope that we would get. And sometimes it starts innocent with telling something, and then the person who you're telling it is like, well, wonder why they did that. Well, I bet they did it because of this. Well, then the next person they tell, they did this because of this. And then did you hear what it goes? It doesn't always have to start in a negative sense, but sometimes we want to fill in the blanks or the empty spaces with presuppositions and things that maybe we think would have happened there as well. All right. So the last time we were together last week, we were talking about how Jesus had went into up near Tyre, Phoenicia. And so a couple of things here we'll read tonight that Jesus had departed from this region and returned to the area around the Sea of Galilee. This pathway here in the red is an assumed path, not necessarily for sure how anybody would have went. But we're going to see that according to Matthew, the multitudes brought to him many lame, blind, mute, and maimed people to be healed. The word multitude means what? Just many, right? If you're describing, we probably would not say that there was a multitude of people at church this evening, right? But if we went to the football game last Friday night, we might have said there was a multitude of people. There may have been a few thousand there. Multitude will imply a larger number. And they're bringing lame people, would be blind, mute, maimed, whatever it might be. What would be the purpose of trying to get these people to Jesus? Hoping that they could heal him. And when Jesus had went up into this area, when he came back, we're just making guesses here, but there was probably some relief on some people like, oh, he's back. We missed our chance the last time. Maybe this is an opportunity for us to get this, to have our friend or relative or whatever healed. The third bullet point there, neither Matthew or Mark give a specific location where this took place beyond simply skirting the Sea of Galilee. So this little question mark here is sort of an assumption. But again, we find Jesus back in the Sea of Galilee area where he has been for quite a bit. And we'll see that when they beheld the miraculous cures, and that's plural there as well, they glorified the God of Israel. We've seen this quite often, right? Whenever Jesus heals someone, whenever Jesus does something that they hadn't seen done before, what was the response quite often from the crowd? Amazed, astonished, I think is a word. We read last week or maybe the week before that they'd never seen anything like this in all of Israel, or some sentence along those lines there as well. But the point being is that they knew what Jesus could do. And by this point, we're in the 21st lesson, 21st miracle. There's a desire to get to Jesus. And we'll see that here this evening as well. I want to read first. This is Matthew 15, 29, and 30. It's not very much here. The Mark's version is a lot more has a lot more in it than does Matthew's. But Linda, do you care to read? This is simply Matthew 15, 29, and 30. So when we talk about this, I'd already kind of written this, but I've said quite often that I think there are 34 miracles that we're going to cover. But at the end of his book, that if you'd written down everything that Jesus did, what would happen? There wouldn't be enough books, and that's clearly an exaggeration. But what the point being is that it's not a small number; it's a multitude of things. Well, this two verses right here are not part of the miracle. But how many miracles are in that last sentence? Having with them lame, blind, mute, maimed, and many others, and they laid them down at Jesus' feet, and he healed them. Okay? Well, it's a multitude is the number. So you get in your head what a multitude is, and then you think that's how many people he healed. Well, how many miracles is that? Thousands, right? That's an incomprehensible number, right? So when I say this is the 21st miracle, it's the 21st recorded, accounted, we're going to study it miracle. But there were a lot more than that along the way. But I wanted to see the Matthew version of this first. Here's our picture for tonight. It's an old one from 1635 at the Louvre in Paris. Boo, you've been there, haven't you? When you're gone? Oh, you're okay. I got you. All right. So look this one up. All right. Tell them we showed this at church the other night. Y'all got this one hanging around somewhere in there. So they'll probably take you straight to it, I think. But healing the deaf mute of Decapolis. Decapolis is the area around where Jesus was. Called that because there were 10 towns that made it up. Now let's get into what we're actually going to be looking at tonight, which is that miracle that Jesus did. Let's start first. Mark 7, we're reading 31 through 34 to start with. Ben, do you care to read this, sir? All right. So I kind of misspoke a minute ago that the guy couldn't speak, but there was a speech impediment, is what you would see here in Mark. And so it was difficulty to be able to speak, or something that ability. You may have went to school with people who had speech impediments. I have a few friends of mine that had speech impediments that were worked with, and they had to try to improve upon them as they went along. But this is this is the start of our story right there. So let's talk first about this man. We said, what two things about him? What's the only things that we really know here? Okay. He was deaf, and he had an inability to speak. All right. The inability to speak. Do we see anything here about Jew or Gentile? Anything here about rich or poor? Father was the head of the temple, anything like that? So we've seen a lot of these miracles over the last few weeks, and some of these cases involve people that we knew maybe a little bit more about. This guy is the story that's going to told, and in many ways, this may be the story that sort of is representative of all the healing that took place in and around Sea of Galilee there at the time. But this man that was brought to him certainly had something that would need fixed. Why would a person or with a speech impediment need healed? Yeah. To be able to communicate with the rest of the world, and that would be difficult for them. And so this is somebody that would, if we want to use a word today, would qualify for this, right? This is somebody that we would want to be healed. So what does Jesus do to the man? And I want to be specific here. So if you've got your Bible, go to verse 33, because there are a couple of things that we want to mention. Okay, first of all, verse 33, the first thing it says that Jesus did what for him? Took him aside, right? So he kind of moved away from the crowd just a bit. Wonder why? Right. Can you fix a leg? Yeah. Right. Uh-huh. Very well could be. So the first thing we see is that Jesus takes him aside. What's the second part then? Put his fingers into his ears. Now, I would imagine that anybody who has a sibling has probably done something like this to the sibling, right? I would also imagine that you can tell me all about when he or she slapped you right across the face for doing that, right? When you did something like that. Well, I don't know what the sign, we'll get into that just a little bit, but this is the first thing he does, right? He puts his fingers into his ears. Well, actually pulls him aside, puts his fingers into his ears. What's the third thing then? Spat, and then what? Feel like there's not enough information right there. I don't know if he, it's like a pitcher who spits on his hand and then throws the ball, or I don't know. But is this the way you would have done it? Maybe not, right? This feels like the, by the way, if you've ever spit and touched the tongue of your sibling, they probably hit you after that as well, right there. But this is what we see Jesus do, okay? Now, those are the actions that we see. What does Jesus then do and speak in verse 34? So he looks up to heaven, right? So he's done sort of all of this, whatever, looks up to heaven and then says what? You can just give me the English verse. Be opened, right? He says to be opened. Now, if you were to take these two verses to your doctor and say, would this cure deafness or a speech impediment? What will your doctor say? No. He's going to say that that's not going to work, right? Why is that not going to work? There's not true. There's nothing medical about this, right? This is not a medical procedure. There are ways that deafness can be fixed. There are ways that speech impediments can be fixed. I'm sure some of you all have seen the videos where they put the little implants on kids and they hear things for the first time and it just makes you cry just to see it because it just opens up a whole new world. But there's thousands of years of medical science right here. This is not medical, but there's a reason for it. Let's look at this. I probably should have made this a little bit bigger, but this was not a medical treatment, but rather what we would call maybe a symbolic action. Okay. And so imparting his power to the man's defective ears and to the man's defective tongue, right? He touched the parts that didn't work. Okay. But there was a symbol here, okay? This was not getting a shot. This was not, we don't see Jesus ever say, well, you're going to need 6 years of rehabilitation to be, that we don't see that there, right? And so by looking to the heaven, he acknowledges his Father, acknowledges their unity. I want us to look at John chapter 5 and verse 19 real quickly. Mom, do you care to read this? Yes, that's it. So I want us to think about this verse and then think about what Jesus did. How does the actions of Jesus toward this man that he's healing, how does the action sort of reflect John 5, verse 19? Okay. Always acknowledge his Father. Mom said he doesn't do this for any kind of credit. Look at me, look at me. Right. And he emulates. Yeah. And this is after we've seen Jesus be questioned for saying that he could forgive sins and that kind of stuff. And so this is something that Jesus was doing. But it wasn't just him doing it; it was through God. Was this something that the leaders of the community would have been able to have done? No, that they would not. And so it shows a difference in that. And I think even more, and this is just me thinking, and you don't have to agree with me, but even the almost comical way in which it's done, to me, is almost a way of showing there is no way you can do this. If I were to go to the heart surgeon in Lexington, the way they operated would probably be similar to the one in New York and the one in San Francisco, right? There's sort of an established medical way of doing a bypass surgery or whatever it might would be. But what Jesus does, this and this, all, if you went up and did that to somebody, is that going to fix them? No. And so I say that comically because it was almost just, and for lack of a better word, almost a showing of you can't do this, but I can do this through my Father God. Thoughts on that before we go any further? Yeah. Sure. And very little science behind it. I said that at the beginning of these lessons. I said, I don't want to get into the sort of physical, the scientific part of it because it's just you saying one thing and I bet he did this. I bet we don't know how that would have been. But the point of this is it's sort of proven here that he could do what other people couldn't. Other thoughts? Right. Right. Ben. Right. Yep. Ben, it's entirely possible that somebody's tried to heal that man by sticking their fingers in his ears or twisting his ears, whatever. He may have had somebody made that effort in the past and failed at it. We don't know about that, but I think you're exactly right in what you're saying. Other thoughts on this method before we go any further? Okay. Let's go then further into the story, even though there's not too far to go, but mm-hmm. Sure. Right. That could get you into some Trinitarian, Unitarian type stuff. The concept of this God in three persons kind of thing was not sort of clarified until about 300 or 400 AD. But I say that even though it's often referenced by the Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Peter, Paul, that Hebrews, Revelation, they make reference to it, but it was not sort of like guaranteed. It wasn't always, I don't know. I'm getting too deep into the woods right there. But let's go. Mark chapter 7, 35 through 37. Boo, since you're going to be gone for a couple weeks, we'll let you read this one. Okay. And so this is almost a cut and paste set of verses from things that we've already read, right? The only thing we need to go in and change is his ears were open and tongue was loose. And we could say his legs worked or, the demon was gone. It's almost the exact same thing because we see then how Jesus gives them a command afterwards. Let's consider that for a second. First of all, how would we say the cure? What I really mean by this is, when was this man healed? It says in verse 35, it says, immediately his ears were opened, and what else? His tongue was loosed. And the last part of verse 35 says he spoke how? He spoke plainly, right? So all of that within a verse after Jesus goes through the process of it. Jesus again tells the people what? Not to tell it. So we've seen, how many times have I asked you this question? We've had 21 lessons, so it was 12 times I feel like we've talked about this. What do they do? Verse 36 and verse 37. There's the way it's written, though. It's interesting in verse 36. It says, the more he commanded them not to, the back half of 36 says what? The more widely they proclaimed it. Right. Right. Put it in the newspaper. Yeah. Right. 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 He was fixed there. Verse 37. Another word that we've seen quite often. We mentioned it already. Verse 37, it says they were what? Beyond measure. The word astonished. We've said that before. This is not new for us tonight. But then the actual quote in verse 37, it says that he has done what? All things well. Okay. Now, do you know somebody who does some things well? A few things well. But it's really rare that somebody does all things well. A couple years ago, I sent Dad a scout card about Ernie Banks, who played baseball for the Chicago Cubs for 20 years. And they were scouting him. I don't know if it was high school or summer league or whatever. I think Ernie Banks was from Mobile, Alabama, I believe. But on the card, they put your name, they put your height, they put your weight, they put all this kind of stuff. And at the bottom, it says additional comments. And the scout said, he can play in the major leagues right now. What essentially that guy was saying is he does all things well. This guy doesn't need to go to single A and double A and get better as a hitter or as a runner or learn how to play the outfield because he's not real good in the infield. He said he can do it right now. Well, what are they saying about Jesus in verse 37 when he says he does all things well? What are they saying there? We can't say it again, Connie. He's perfect. You can't find fault. And at this point, there's enough data to find fault, right? There's enough data to say, well, he wasn't real good at this or that. The first time we talked about this when he turned the water to wine, we said, well, maybe that was a trick or what. But by this point, it's hard to say that, right? It's hard to say anything like that. That he's proven himself capable of doing all this. As Lucille said there, he makes the deaf hear and the mute to speak, something that no one had been able to do for either group prior to that. Right. Well, as always, I feel like when I get to this, I've already taken all the good points in your comments, but I appreciate you all doing just that. But the way Jesus heals tells us a whole lot about who he really is. And that's what Ben was saying there just a few moments ago, right? He wasn't some wandering preacher, some charlatan, like Ben said a minute ago, performing some unusual miracle. We read Isaiah 35, verses 5 and 6 there at the beginning, but he spoke of a new age to come when the eyes of the blind would be open and the ears of the deaf would be unstopped. Well, part of that is access to the gospel, but another part of that is that people would be healed in this way. I think so. We see that quite often. And for everybody that was on board, there was a whole lot of people that weren't. That's exactly right. But we see Jesus showing who he was. Number two, Jesus wants us to follow him for the right reasons, right? So the right way and the wrong way to follow someone. Jesus didn't want people to follow him because he was a healer, right? Did people follow Jesus because he was a healer? But that was not his main purpose, right? He had the ability to perform miracles, we know that, but his main purpose was to come, to live, to go to the cross, to die, to open up the door for us, right? And part of that secrecy, part of that, hey, don't go tell it, was I still have more to do. And the more people you tell, the more trouble that can come from it, and the more I may not be able to get done with the task that I need to do. And finally, yes, sir. Go ahead. Mm-hmm. We've had that conversation a few times in here on Wednesday night. How difficult, yes, or how difficult it would be to not tell that, Mary. Right, right, right. Yeah, right, right. Sure, sure. Sure. Mm-hmm. Sure. Uh, and I think that's kind of what I was going to say, but he had been sort of forever out of the loop, right? And now his ears were open, his mouth was, he was able to speak, and he was, I guess, he was unchained from the things that held him back, right? And we can think about this, and we played a little game at the beginning, but after this was over, I don't know what this guy did when he went home. But I suspect he could have said, two tiny toads ate fat flying flies, dogs dig holes for big bones, many maids mop motels, a bunch of yellow bananas launched on a blue boat, 12 tumbling purple people pulled turnips. We can't even say that, right? But it opened up an opportunity for him. And for us, remove those things that block us as well. We can hear, we can speak, but sometimes we use them in all the wrong ways. And what we should do is use them in the right ways to hear the word of God and to say that to other people as well. And I hope that that would be our goal going forward. If there's anything we can do for you, any way we can help you in any way,